Welcome to the fourth in a series of videos on using OneFile. My name is Michael Walby and I'm a skills and development coach here at First Intuition. In this next video, we'll look at creating and submitting a timesheet. Now, submitting timesheets is really important on the program, as it's the way in which we record and track off-the-job learning. You'll remember from your introduction module that you have to complete 20% of your contracted hours as off-the-job learning in order to meet the requirements of your apprenticeship. And it's by submitting timesheets that we build the evidence to demonstrate that. It's really important to submit your timesheets on a regular basis, as it's far harder to retrospectively complete a timesheet when a long period of time has passed and you struggle to recall what you did with your time. So make sure you keep a record of any time that you spend during the week that would count as off-the-job learning, so that when you come to completing a timesheet, you can quickly refer to your notes and then submit your timesheet to your skills coach for review. This should be a relatively frictionless process, but it does depend upon you taking action to complete your own notes to make sure you have a record of the time that you've spent building your experience that qualifies as off-the-job learning. Now, in this particular video, I'm not going to go into the detail of what qualifies or doesn't qualify as off-the-job learning, but more information on that can be found in the attachment section of your profile, which we'll talk about in a later video. You remember from your introduction module that I stated that if you're uncertain as to whether or not you've incurred some time that could be counted as off-the-job learning, my advice is to submit it through a timesheet with enough information to allow your coach to make that decision as to whether or not it counts. By doing that, we ensure that we maximize the chances of capturing all the time that's permissible for off-the-job learning. If you don't submit it, we can't look at it and we certainly can't add it to your portfolio. Okay, so let's look at submitting your timesheet. It's not that different to completing a development task. So the first thing to note is where to find it on OneFile. So there are a couple of places that you can access your timesheets. And the first is here on the left-hand side in the menu, which says Timesheets. And if you click on this, it'll take you through to the timesheet page. Once again, if you find yourself in the Portfolio tab, you can scroll down and see that there's a button that's marked Timesheets. And if you click on that button, it'll take you through to the same timesheet entry screen. So let's have a quick look at this screen. At the top, we have a button for creating a timesheet entry, which we'll do shortly. But I first want to draw your attention to this section, which is called Off the Job. And as you can see in this section, it highlights your total contracted hours on the program. And this will depend upon the length of your program and will be taken from the planner document that you would have signed off when you signed your agreement for the apprenticeship. The target off the job percentage will be the same for everybody, which is 20%, which then calculates your target off the job hours. So in this case, the total contracted hours are 5,250 hours, which gives a target off-the-job hours of 1,050. The final line here actually records what the total actual off-the-job hours are that have been recorded on your timesheets in your account on OneFile. In this case, it's 636.9 hours. So this is a cumulative total of all of the timesheets that you've captured and gives you an indication as to how you're progressing towards your 20% target. On the right-hand side, you can see that there's a heading off the job along with a percentage. And let me just explain how that's calculated. That's calculated by taking the actual off the job hours and dividing it within your total contracted hours. So you can see that in this particular profile, this person has logged sufficient time to have accumulated 12.1% of the off-the-job hours based on their contracted hours. So when you're starting out on this program, of course, this percentage is going to be very small, but it's going to grow over time with each successive timesheet that you submit and get signed off. And of course, we want you to get to a point before the gateway where this figure is either 20% or higher. Now, scrolling down, you can see that there's a summary screen that shows the summary of how you have accumulated your off-the-job learning to date. And there are a variety of different categories, including attending FI courses, attending revision days for an exam, submitting reflective statements, for example, in this case, internal training that may have qualified. So this gives you a summary of where the off-the-job learning hours are coming from. And it also helps your skills and development coach to get a feel for where you're accumulating your off-the-job hours. And then if we scroll right to the bottom, you can see that this is a list of each individual timesheet entry that is submitted. So you can always review the detail that is behind your total actual off-the-job hours. Okay, so that is a summary of your creating timesheet entry page. So let's go ahead now and look at how to create a timesheet. So we go back to the top of the page, we'll see that there's the button Create Timesheet Entry. So we click on that, and that will create a pop-up with a section that enables us to put in a commentary on the time that we're entering into our timesheet, along with some further data on the right-hand side. Now, what are you including in your timesheet? Well, this is all the off-the-job learning time that qualifies, excluding the time that it takes you to complete a reflective statement. So if you remember from an earlier video, we submitted a reflective statement to recognize the learning outcomes from our second week on the program, where we had written our first email to a client and also completed some accounts review. Now, in that particular development task, we only included the time it took us to complete the reflective statement. The actual time that it took us to complete the tasks would be submitted through your timesheet entry. So in this example, we would put, I completed drafting my very first email to a business contact, and this enabled me to learn about writing professionally. Okay, now you want to make sure that what you include in your timesheet entry is sufficient information to allow your skills and development coach to sign off that this entry qualifies for off-the-job learning. If you don't put in sufficient detail here, it's likely that your skills and development coach will not sign off on your timesheet and will request further information. So again, if you want to make this process as frictionless as possible, the more information you can put in your timesheet entry here, the better. Okay, looking at the data fields on the right-hand side, you then go across to the category section, and you need to decide on which of these categories you want to assign the timesheet to. As you remember from slightly earlier in the video, this helps us to see an analysis of how your off-the-job learning is accumulated based on these categories. So it could be because you've attended an FI course. So this, for example, is a category that you would use if you were recording time that you had spent attending a professional qualification course to complete an exam. Or, for example, if you were submitting a reflective statement, you might include it against e-portfolio work, which is, of course, what we're doing here. You have exam study, which you may use for submitting time that you attend on the revision course for your final exam. This is a category that you could use for your initial introduction course. And if you have qualifying internal training, you can use this heading here. My recommendation is that when you decide upon which category to use, stick to using that same category for the same types of evidence or timesheet entries that you're doing going forward, because that makes the comparison and analysis of your timesheet entries easier. So for example, if you were to put your exam study time for your early exams under exam study, but then subsequently change your category for attending courses to this heading, then you're going to be not comparing like with like. So I think my advice would be, once you choose a category, stick to it because that makes that analysis easier to do. Okay, so in this example, it's a reflective statement, so we're going to select e-portfolio work. And you're required to submit a start date for this particular submission. and let's say for this example that it's today's date, which is the 10th of January, and then you're required to enter a start time. So let's say for this example that I started work on writing this email at 10 o'clock in the morning. Then you're required to actually enter the duration of activity. So this is, of course, where you're recording the actual time that it took you to complete this particular learning activity. And let's say that it took me 45 minutes to draft the email, get it reviewed by my manager, go through their feedback, make the changes, and then send it off to the client. So we would put 0 hours and 45 minutes in this box. Okay. Once that's completed, we then click on Save. So once you've saved your timesheet, you'll be taken back to the Create Timesheet Entry screen. And if we scroll right down to the bottom, we'll see here that we have our timesheet entry submitted on the 10th of January, reflective statement for second week of the program. So that's how you create and submit a timesheet entry. If you're happy with how to do this, then we can now move on to the next video. Alternatively, if you have any further questions on creating a timesheet entry and submitting it, please contact your skills and development coach. Thank you for watching.